So in today's video we're going to be looking at an old budget favourite, the GT 1030. Unfortunately I don't have a GT 1030, but I do have one at the unit I work at. So we're going to go pick that up just now and then get a look at it. Right, so here it is. It's an 2 gig Asus, or Asus, however you're supposed to pronounce it, GT 1030. Don't actually know if this is the GDDR5 version or the DDR3 version. DDR4? Yeah, it was DDR4. But yeah, I don't know which version it is. Hopefully it is the GDDR5 version because that would be so much better. But yeah, we're going to get this back home now, get it in the system and see what's up with it. So let's get GPU-Z open and see what we've actually got. And it is in fact the GDDR5 version. It would be a hell of a lot better performing than the DDR4 version. GP108, so it's definitely a GT 1030. Drivers already installed. But yeah, everything looks great. Let's go check the drivers though, because I don't know if the GT 1030 still actually supports the latest Nvidia drivers. And just select a random RTX 50 card, because that will show us what the latest version is. 581.57, so let's cross check that with our GT 1030. I know Nvidia were going to be legacy in, if that's even a word, the 10 series, so I don't know if our 1030 will still actually support it. That's a 1010. I have my microphone in the way of the screen and I can't actually see it. Yep, 581.57, so yeah, GT 1030 still actually supports the latest Nvidia drivers, almost a decade after it actually came out. TimeSpy probably isn't the best of benchmarks to run on this, but it works. It's DX12 compliant, so GT 1030 will still run it. I'm interested to see what kind of score it gets though. Lower end parts like this are definitely one of my bigger interests. As you may well know if you've been a long time viewer of the channel, an entire 6.8 FPS. Absolutely blazing fast performance. I thought for a minute there I'd accidentally set the demo mode to run, or some kind of loop, because it ran for a lot longer than I remember TimeSpy actually being. But I probably just don't remember TimeSpy that well. I think that's it actually done. Let's see what score we get. So we've got 1289. Averaging about 1228. That's actually, yeah, so we're kind of bang in the middle in terms of the GT 1030 we actually have here. Full disclosure, that 1447 score, you probably can't actually see that on camera, but the best score for us 6700K, which is what we're using for CPU, and the GT 1030 is 1447 here. That is actually my score, because I have already been playing around with overclocking on this, and managed to get plus 200 on the core, which is, it's alright, yeah. I mean, I think that's a bit more than average for core clock, for Pascal cards anyway. But I also managed to get plus 750 megahertz on the memory. Was not expecting that. The GT10, GT1080, GTX 1080 I had topped out at plus 500 before it started to get artifacts. I did actually encounter a bit of a black hole in terms of frequency, around 250 to 600 megahertz, but once you get past 600 megahertz the score then started going up again and was past what I was getting with lower frequencies. But yeah, we are capable of 1447, so technically we have the world's best GT 1030 and 6700K combination. So I know that this is working now. We even got ourselves a cheeky little 3D Mark record there with a GT 1030 and a 6700K, but it's a record nonetheless, so I'll take it. The only thing I found with this so far, which is kind of annoying, is, and I'll try and insert a clip of it here, the fan on this, and I don't know if it's just this specific fan being dodgy or if it was this model, but it makes a really high-pitched noise. And yeah, that's going to really great if you're using this daily. But yeah, I'm quite happy with it so far. It's the GDDR5 version, which is even better. So yeah, let's get this back in the system and then we'll probably get on with the benchmarks.
So what we actually have here then is a low profile Asus GT 1030. We've got 384 CUDA cores at 1266 MHz, boosting to 1506 as standard. But our overclock pushes this to around 1800 to over 1900 MHz on average. Although the 1030 will run modern games, this one just doesn't have enough memory to keep up. And the tiny 64-bit wide memory bus and 6 gigabit per second memory speed isn't going to help either.
This would actually be ideal for a more HTPC focused build, because we have both native HDMI and DisplayPort outputs as well. And you can presumably also get a low profile adapter to replace the full size one we have on the card just now. This would actually be an ideal upgrade for something like an old Dell Optiplex system from an office clearance sale or something like that, because it's small enough to fit in there. It doesn't need an external PCIe power connector, and as you'll see during the benchmarks today in the overlay I normally have on the screen, power draw rarely, if ever, goes over 30 watts, even with the overclock.
Peak was first up on my test bench today, and this one ran fairly well for the most part. We could manage 1080p at high settings. Well, kind of. Peak still surprises me with how intense it is for how it looks. 1030 needs the render scale set to medium to run at a decent frame rate. I don't know what Peak's render scales equate to in terms of resolution, so whatever resolution that comes out to, that's what we managed. There were a few minor hitches and stutters throughout, but the first area, the shore, was comfortably over 60 FPS for the most part. The second area, the tropics, is a lot more intense, especially with all the rain and stuff. But even then, it still sits in the 40s with occasional dips into the 30s. Frame times are still smooth across the board though, so regardless of frame rate, Peak still plays really well. Fallout 4 actually ran really good too, despite all the optimization issues it has. 900p with the medium preset is what we're running here. I've disabled motion blur, lens flares and depth of field through the INI file, but it's pretty much the medium preset. VSync was our only real problem today. When a game can't quite maintain the monitor's refresh rate, 60Hz in our case, VSync rapidly cuts the FPS to half the refresh rate before increasing it again. So we never actually had any stutter, not really. We still averaged 59 FPS with fairly good percentiles, but VSync rapidly cutting the frame rate in half before returning to normal can cause what looks like stuttering in areas of the map where the 1030 can't quite keep up with the monitor. In the past, disabling VSync was fairly simple, just a quick tweak in the game's config files, but it caused major issues with the physics once the frame rate went over 60. Thankfully though, the modding community came to the rescue, and you can now download fixes allowing you to run frame rates as high as your hardware, or the game's engine, allows, without the physics going haywire. CS2 is kind of a mixed bag in terms of performance. Simpler maps, Mirage, Dust 2, etc. have a couple of minor stutters, usually at the start of rounds, but otherwise run quite well, even seeing frame rates over 100 FPS at times. It's more intense maps, Ancient, Anubis, and surprisingly Overpass as well, where we get some issues with performance. There's the odd bit of stuttering here and there, but the main problems are frame rate, or frame rate inconsistency to be exact. You could be seeing over 60 1 second, but turn a corner, run into some enemies or even your own teammates, and the FPS drops under 50. Not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, as long as frame times are consistent, that's still decent enough. It's just the contrast between plus 60 FPS 1 second to sub 50 the next is quite glaring. Ancient is actually a bit better than that, to be honest. Frame rates are usually in the low to high 40s, but they're at least consistently in the low to high 40s, and that really makes gameplay feel so much better. You could improve performance quite drastically though. I used 900p with the medium preset, 16x anisotropic filtering, CMAA2 for anti-aliasing and no upscaling. You could turn a lot of those settings down, and you probably would if you're playing competitively. I'm more about having fun though, so I'm good with where performance is at just now. Now, obviously, we have to answer the age-old question of, can it run Crysis? And yeah, long story short, it can. really quite well actually. I had trouble getting the DirectX 10 version running on Windows 11, but I found a fix online which got everything up and running. It's actually the same user created fix, GOG included by default in the version available on their store. Knowing that made me feel a lot more comfortable downloading what I thought at the time was some potentially dodgy executable from a complete stranger. The only thing the 1030 didn't cope particularly well with were shader settings higher than medium. High shaders were fine, ran well and had no stuttering that I could see, but frame rates were close enough to 60 that the limited improvement in graphical fidelity just wasn't worth it for the times that it would drop below it. Another thing I noticed was smoke from the red flare near the start of the first area would cause frame rates to dip into the high 40s, but that's nothing really. We still averaged over 80 FPS otherwise. With BeamNG, I like testing easier to run maps like the clifftop one here, harder to run maps like the jungle 2. It gives me a good look at how any hardware I'm testing can cope with the two extremes with how varied the frame rates can be. And that definitely shows in my test results today. 900p with the low preset is about where the 1030 wants to be. That gives us decent frame rates, approaching 100 FPS on the clifftop map, and around the high 40s to low 50s in the jungle. I saw pretty decent performance overall, never saw any stuttering, hitches, and the frame times were really smooth, even in the more intense jungle map. I am kind of disappointed though. I was expecting way better performance for some reason. I guess I've just been spoiled by how well some of the hardware I've had in for testing has done before. I mean, BeamNG technically is still in alpha after all. So optimization issues like this are obviously still to be expected. That and the 1030 is still a near decade old card, so there's that too.
I am still quite impressed with this, to be perfectly honest. I always said I was disappointed in it in BeamNG. I think it was BeamNG anyway. I'm recording this a couple of days after the fact. But yeah, overall I am actually still quite impressed. It's a decade old card and it was budget at its time and it's still doing pretty well in like the games of its time and before, so like Crysis obviously does quite well but even games now like CS2 for example, it does a lot better than I was expecting and I didn't even need upscaling with that. Peak, it does surprisingly well in and that was a big surprise because like Peak is a lot more intensive graphically than what you would expect given its art style. Would I recommend buying one of these though? Probably not. I mean, if your use case absolutely needs a low profile card with no requirement for external power, then yeah, I mean, you can buy these for £35 here in the UK on CEX. But for literally the exact same price, or maybe even £5 cheaper, I can't remember, you can get the 2GB GDDR5 version of the GTX 1050, which is a lot better performance wise than this is. But yeah, if your requirements don't absolutely need to be low profile like this and no external PCIe power connector, you can even get ones like the GTX 960, GTX 970 for a couple of pounds more than this. An R9 290X, the 4GB version, for cheaper than this is. Granted, that does use 10 times the power this does, but that gives you an idea of the kind of performance you're giving up by going for the form factor of this. I'm still impressed at what it can do for what it is, and considering how old it is as well. But yeah, that's going to be all for today. Thank you for your time.